June 24th, 2021, 7:14 p.m. The strongest tornado in modern Czech history touched down in South Moravia, carving a 27-kilometer path of devastation through peaceful wine country. 6 people died. 576 were injured. Over 1,800 buildings were damaged or destroyed. But those numbers only tell part of the story. This is the story of what happened after the cameras left. The hidden consequences that no one talks about. The families still rebuilding their lives 4 years later. The survivors who flee to their cellars every time the wind rises. The communities still healing from wounds that run deeper than any damaged roof or cracked foundation. This tornado was not just the deadliest European storm in 2 decades. It was a catastrophe that nobody saw coming, in a country where tornadoes simply do not happen, until they do. Thursday, June 24th, began like any summer day in South Moravia. Surface temperatures reached 30 degrees Celsius. The vineyards were thick with summer growth. Children played in village squares. Nobody knew that conditions 5,000 meters above their heads were creating something catastrophic. Tropical moisture collided with unstable air, creating a term called CAPE, convective available potential energy. That afternoon, CAPE levels hit 5,000 joules per kilogram. Meteorologists described those conditions as extremely unstable, but even they did not predict what was about to happen. The Czech Hydrometeorological Institute issued severe weather warnings: heavy rain, strong winds, hail. There was no tornado warning. Czech weather radars are designed to track precipitation, not detect tornadoes. As one spokesperson later explained, they only learn about a tornado when the whirlwind emerges from a storm and starts reaching the land surface. By then, it is too late. At 7:14 in the evening, 1 kilometer east of Břeclav, the tornado touched down. Within minutes, it would become an F4 rated monster with winds exceeding 330 kilometers per hour. It would grow to 3.5 kilometers wide, the widest tornado ever recorded in European history, and it was heading straight for 6 unsuspecting villages. Hrušky was first. The tornado ripped through this village of just over 200 homes like a freight train. 58 buildings were destroyed or severely damaged. The elementary school lost its roof. The church tower was torn away. Deputy Mayor Marek Babiš surveyed the destruction, and he said simply, "Half of my village has been razed." But Hrušky was just the beginning. The tornado intensified as it moved southeast, directly toward Moravská Nová Ves. At 7:25 in the evening, it struck with full F4 fury. The church clock stopped at that exact moment, 7:25, frozen in time. A haunting timestamp that remains visible today. The tornado tore the roof from the church and damaged 369 buildings. Some families watched their homes disintegrate in seconds. Then came Mikulčice, where the tornado reached peak intensity. Multiple thick-walled brick houses, built to last generations, were completely flattened. An occupied passenger bus was picked up and thrown over a hill into a destroyed home. Multiple passengers were severely injured. One car was lofted 200 meters into a vineyard. Investigators later found its engine block 150 meters away in the opposite direction. The force required to separate an engine from a car and throw them in different directions is almost unimaginable. In the cemetery, gravestones cracked. 62 homes were completely destroyed. The tornado had become a true violent event, the kind of storm that meteorologists study for years afterward, trying to understand how nature can create such devastating power. By the time it reached Lucis, fires had broken out. Severed gas lines and electrical wires sparked amid the debris. Mayor Tomáš Klasek reported between 100 and 120 houses destroyed or damaged. Emergency services were already overwhelmed, and the tornado was not finished yet. The tornado finally began to weaken as it approached Hodonín, a city of 24,000 people. But even in its dying stages, it damaged a retirement home so severely that every resident had to be evacuated. The municipal zoo was destroyed. Hundreds of structures were damaged. At 7:53 in the evening, 39 minutes after it began, the tornado finally dissipated. In its wake, 6 people were dead, including a wine producer, a teacher, a pregnant woman, and a small child who would die 2 days later at Brno University Hospital. 576 people were injured. Over 121,000 households were without electricity, and 6 villages would never be the same. Dr. Antonin Tesarik will never forget that night. As director of Hodonín Hospital, he watched up to 200 injured residents flood through his doors. It was an apocalypse, he recalled. There was blood everywhere, and helpless people in tears. They saved their lives and lost the roofs over their heads. His hospital admitted 45 patients. 6 were in serious condition. 4 required intensive care. The injuries kept coming, many of them from indirect causes. People cut by flying glass, crushed by falling debris, injured trying to escape collapsing buildings. The tornado itself lasted 39 minutes, but its victims would fill hospitals for days. Hedvika Kropakova, spokeswoman for South Moravian Rescue Services, described the chaos in those first hours. There are bus accidents, torn roofs, and probably desperate people in buildings. We are sending everything that has hands and wheels, everything to these regions. By midnight, Czech Interior Minister Jan Hamáček had declared a state of emergency. 2,000 professional firefighters deployed alongside 2,000 volunteers. 1,000 soldiers joined them. 500 police officers responded. Austria and Slovakia sent rescue teams that same night. The response was overwhelming, but so was the destruction. David Jirus, head of South Moravia's Fire Rescue Operations Center Tishan, supervised the unprecedented response. His teams used drones equipped with aerial mapping software for the first time in Czech disaster response history. By morning, they had searched 99% of the affected villages. Giroux said that it was something unimaginable, because tornadoes are very rare in our area. But the real work was just beginning. As the sun rose on June 25th, the full scope of the disaster became visible. The survivors began to understand that their lives had changed forever. Zlata Maděřičová of Moravská Nová Ves lost her roof that night. The damage was extensive throughout her home. 1 year later, in June 2022, she had just hung curtains on her new windows. A small milestone, a moment of normalcy. But the wounds ran deeper than any window or roof could show. To this day, when a big wind rises, she goes to sit in the cellar, she said. It was a terrible experience. She described months when residents did not feel up to laughing. The psychological damage was as real as the physical destruction, and it would last far longer. Yet Zlata also discovered something unexpected. She said that if it had not happened, she would not have gotten to know so many people who came out to help right away, without wanting anything in return. This is the hidden paradox of disaster. The trauma that drives survivors to their cellars during every storm, and the human connection forged in crisis. The solidarity that emerges when everything else has been torn away. For the Bartoník family, the disaster struck at the heart of their livelihood. Radek Bartoník's family are winemakers, their lives intertwined with the land and the seasons. The tornado damaged their vineyards, their winery, and their father's house. We have been able to fix a lot already, thanks to the amazing solidarity people have shown, Radek explained in 2022. But with our vineyard, for example, it is going to take a really long time, and we have not even started repairing our father's house yet. The timeline for vineyard recovery is brutal in its simplicity. Newly planted vines require 3 years before producing grapes suitable for harvest. 3 years of waiting. 3 years without income from that land. The Bartoník family's first post-tornado vintage likely came only in 2024 or 2025. That is an economic gap that insurance and government aid cannot accelerate. You cannot rush a grapevine any more than you can rush healing from trauma. When NHL defenseman Michael Kempny learned his hometown of Hodonín had been devastated, he did not hesitate. Mikkel Kempny, who won the Stanley Cup with the Washington Capitals in 2018, returned immediately. For days, he worked on ladders with a hammer in hand, helping repair damaged homes. He wrote on Instagram that he still cannot believe what kind of a catastrophe struck the south of Moravia yesterday. He said that the return was different and personal. Assessing the current situation gave him chills. He said he knew many families were not that lucky, and that made him feel sad. He added a message saying, "Stay strong, South Moravia." His fiancée Nicola posted photos of him working on repairs, with a simple caption saying, "Proud of you." Sometimes the most powerful response to disaster is simply showing up, putting on work gloves, and helping rebuild. Over 30 Vietnamese families were among those affected. A community within a community. Within 24 hours of the disaster, the Vietnamese Association in the Czech Republic had raised 200,000 Czech crowns, approximately $9,300, for emergency goods. The Vietnamese embassy organized visits and coordinated targeted support. When disaster strikes, it does not discriminate, and neither does the response. The immediate aftermath saw unprecedented solidarity. Czech citizens donated over 1 billion crowns, approximately 40 million euros. It was the largest charitable response in the country's history. Karl Kamarek, a billionaire philanthropist born in Hodonín, personally donated 150 million crowns and $7 million. He said he was born in Hodonín and that the disaster had deeply affected him, and that they had to act quickly. But even with this outpouring of support, the pace of official assistance created critical gaps. Zlata Maděřičová described a typical experience. She said the funding that nonprofit organizations collected was crucial because people received it very quickly. If you have a house without a roof, it does not help that the state or the insurance company promises to give a contribution 6 months later. You need cash quickly. This is one of the hidden consequences that does not make headlines. Families were trapped in a bureaucratic waiting game while their homes remained open to the weather. Insurance companies processed claims. Government assistance was tied up in red tape. Meanwhile, summer rains fell through missing roofs, and winter approached. The Via Foundation ultimately distributed 222 million crowns to 1,633 households. People in need supported 609 families with 191.7 million crowns. They financed the planting of 23,386 trees and shrubs to restore the devastated landscape. They also provided something equally critical, but rarely discussed: debt counseling. As material prices spiked in the summer of 2021, desperate families faced the risk of falling into predatory lending. Disaster creates vulnerability, and vulnerability attracts predators. The counseling helped prevent a secondary disaster of financial ruin. Government support eventually totaled over 438 million crowns through various programs, with subsidies up to 2 million crowns per damaged home. But the total damage was estimated at 15 billion crowns, approximately 589 million euros. Even with unprecedented assistance, many families faced years of recovery. According to 2024 academic research, repairs to Hrušky village properties were still planned to continue until mid-2025, more than 4 years after the disaster. The most vulnerable 31 households required continuous assistance through 2022. Complex cases involving families with disabilities or difficult economic situations took even longer. This is what recovery actually looks like. Not a dramatic helicopter rescue, or a celebrity donation check. Instead, years of patient work, families waiting for insurance settlements, builders working through backlogs, communities learning to function while half their infrastructure is under reconstruction. Recovery is not a sprint. It's not even a marathon. It is a daily choice to keep going when you are exhausted, and the finish line keeps moving further away. Michaela Viskova, a community organizer from Moravská Nová Ves, noticed something troubling in the months after the tornado. The tornado made it hard to keep up interpersonal relationships, she observed. The disaster had not just damaged buildings, it had fractured the social fabric of village life. Her solution was simple, but profound. She organized community events, open-air cinema screenings, and activities designed to help people feel part of the community again. We want to see smiles on the faces of our fellow citizens after this event, she said. It may seem like a cliche, but we have many months when we did not feel up to laughing. People in Need deployed field workers who conducted over 4,000 psychosocial interventions in the 2 weeks following the disaster. But research on tornado survivors elsewhere, in Joplin, Missouri, and Moore, Oklahoma, suggests that mental health needs typically spike 5 to 7 years after such events. The adrenaline of survival fades. The purpose of rebuilding ends, and then the delayed processing of trauma begins. The children who lived through that night in 2021 are teenagers now. They carry memories of a world that literally came apart, the sound of wind that felt like the end of everything. Some of them probably do not talk about it. Some probably cannot. These hidden consequences ripple forward through time, affecting mental health, relationships, life choices. A disaster that lasted 39 minutes creates trauma that can last a lifetime. And then there are survivors like Zlata, who still flee to their cellars when the wind rises. This is not weakness. This is the body's memory, encoded at a primal level. The survival instinct that saved lives now triggers false alarms, storm anxiety, hypervigilance during weather changes, a permanent rewiring of the nervous system's threat detection. These are the consequences nobody talks about because they are invisible. You can photograph a destroyed house. You can measure economic damage. But how do you measure the cost of a mother who cannot sleep during thunderstorms, a farmer who flinches at the sound of wind, or a child who draws tornadoes in their nightmares? The 2021 South Moravia tornado was not just a regional disaster. It became a pivotal case study for European meteorology. The event directly influenced development of the International Fujita Scale, implemented in the European Severe Weather Database on August 1st, 2023. Before 2021, only 17 violent tornadoes, F4 or stronger, had been documented across Europe between 1950 and 2022. The South Moravia event was Europe's first F4 since a 2017 Russian tornado, and the continent's deadliest since 2001. The European Severe Storms Laboratory and Czech Hydrometeorological Institute published a joint 30-page damage survey report on the first anniversary. A 2024 peer-reviewed paper in the American Meteorological Society Journal documented both the meteorological event and its societal impacts, calling for development of tornado-specific emergency protocols. Those protocols still do not exist in the Czech Republic. 4 years later, the country remains unprepared for the next tornado, whenever it comes, because the uncomfortable truth is that it will come. Climate science suggests that severe weather events like this may become more common, not less. The storm also revealed critical infrastructure vulnerabilities. Czech weather radars are designed primarily to monitor precipitation, not detect tornadoes. As meteorologists acknowledged, they can only confirm a tornado after it is already on the ground and causing damage. By then, the warning comes too late. In Moravská Nová Ves, the church clock still shows 7:25 p.m., Its hands are frozen at the exact moment the tornado struck. Nobody has fixed it. Perhaps nobody wants to. It serves as a natural memorial, visible to everyone who passes. A permanent reminder of the moment that everything changed. Sculptor Michael Blazek created another memorial. Unveiled in 2022. He constructed it from beams of destroyed roofs, shaped to resemble a tornado vortex. Destruction transformed into commemoration. The materials that once sheltered families now stand as a monument to what they endured. Photographer Wojtek Darvik Maka created a documentary series comparing immediate aftermath images with photographs taken 1 year later. The visual evidence of recovery and the scars that persist. Some buildings were rebuilt, others are still in ruins. The uneven pace of healing was captured in before and after frames. A bust of former President Václav Havel was discovered inexplicably unscathed amid surrounding destruction. Volunteer Barbora Zdrahalova photographed it, and the image became an unlikely symbol of resilience. In chaos, something survives intact. It gives people hope that they can too. 4 years after the tornado, the affected villages have largely rebuilt. Schools reopened in September 2022. Wineries have harvested their first post-disaster vintages. New construction lines the western edge of Mikulčice, where homes were leveled. Driving through these villages today, you might not immediately see the scars, but they are there. In the survivors who reflexively seek cellars during thunderstorms. In teenagers processing childhood trauma they may not fully understand. In families whose 6-month insurance timelines stretched into years. In agricultural communities still recovering from the 3-year gap before new vines produced. In a nation with no tornado emergency protocols, despite experiencing Europe's most violent tornado in years. Simon Panek, director of People in Need, captured the essential truth that nobody expected a tornado in the Czech Republic. No one was prepared for it, and no one had any experience of how to act in the event of such a disaster. The storm lasted 39 minutes. The recovery continues. And the hidden consequences, the ones that do not make headlines or generate donations, those consequences may last a lifetime. Because disasters don't end when the debris is cleared and the buildings are rebuilt. They end when the last survivor stops flinching at the sound of wind. When the last child stops having nightmares. When communities fully remember how to laugh without first remembering what they lost. That day hasn't come yet, but in South Moravia, they are still working toward it, one day at a time, one repaired roof, one therapy session, one community gathering, one season when the new vines finally produce grapes. Small victories in a recovery that measures time, not in days or months, but in years. The hidden work of surviving after survival. This is what the cameras didn't show. This is what happens after the disaster leaves the news cycle. This is the real story of the South Moravia tornado. Not the 39 minutes when everything fell apart, but the 4 years and counting when people put it back together, piece by piece, day by day. Until one day, maybe, the church clock in Moravská Nová Ves will start ticking again.